So think about the incentive system. When they say, hey, you shouldn't do heroin, does that make you want to do heroin? No. But if they say, hey, you don't have a right to store your money in a way we can't steal from you, does that make you want to store your money in a way, right? So in America, whenever they talk about cracking down on guns, guess what happens to gun sales?
Yes.
They go through the roof, right?
Hey all, I gave a talk at Rebel Capitalist Live conference in Orlando a short while back, and I met up with some of the smartest financial investment brains in the business. And one of the super smart guys I interviewed in this short is Mark Moss, and he's a freedom and sound money maximalist and an expert on all things Bitcoin. So enjoy this short conversation where we go through Bitcoin and a lot more. We're here at Rebel Capitalist Live, fantastic conference in Orlando, Florida, and I've just met up with Mark Moss, and you are a host of the Market Disruptors podcast, I believe, but I'll let you give a quick intro. You're a Bitcoin guy as well?
Yeah, I'm a freedom maximalist. That's
Excellent.
what I am. And I stumbled my way onto Bitcoin in 2015 because I was looking for a way to have more freedom. And that meant at the time was trying to get money out of the banking system. And I was working on setting up a offshore trust in Panama to move money down there. And I looked at Bitcoin and I said, this is the same thing. I can get my money out of the banking system. And as I started to learn more about it, I said, wait a minute, this is a tool that we can actually use to win. We can actually change the world with this. And so I haven't shut up and I haven't stopped talking about it ever since.
Absolutely. Well, no, Bitcoin in principle to me, I love the concept. I have some of it. I'm a little apprehensive because A, I haven't really explored it in depth, though I've seen quite a few good guys talk about it. And B, I'm so distrusting now of the government that I'm concerned that at some point in the future they will say that Bitcoin is being used for drugs, Bitcoin is being used for terrorism, and then try and impose upon it, you know, bring in some legality to it and then have people get a bit scared. So that's my only concern.
You want me to address those?
Oh yeah, well I mean, yeah,
I'd love to set
absolutely.
your mind at ease.
Yeah,
There's some simple
perfect.
answers for that.
Yeah.
So you said the first one was, did you say AI or?
No, just more governmental regulation coming in.
So they fit together. So basically it's the
Yeah.
same thing, right? So let me just address that first of all. So, you know, I can't speak for every country, but there's a couple things that we have at play. So first of all, they will never allow it to happen because they want to control everything. Who are they? Right, so what do I mean by that? So the world is certainly not a monolith, right? There's different factions and different ideologies. And even in the United States, for example, the US government is not a monolith either. There's certainly lots of people in the US government that probably love to see Bitcoin go away, probably one that would like to kill you if you used it, but there's also a lot of very pro-Bitcoin advocates. Now, what we're seeing in the United States, well, let me back up. Even if Ireland, and even if the UK or the EU, and even if the US said, we will kill you on sight if we catch you, I mean, hypothetically, right? What about the rest of the world? You see, we have nations already like El Salvador that have already adopted it. We have now 5 different nations that are mining Bitcoin and using it to power their system. We have nations that are now put on their balance sheet. So certainly your country could hold themselves back in the dark ages, but you can't stop the rest of the world from progressing. And this is what we call game theory. So shoot yourself in the foot. You want to choose not to trade? You want to, if you know your history, you know about the gunpowder revolution. Gunpowder was not a nice to have. It was like, if we don't have this, we will die. And I think that's sort of how Bitcoin is. And so a nation could choose to hold themselves back and the rest of the world would just get ahead and they'll catch up eventually. That's number one. That's the big authoritarian view. Now, we know it's impossible for any government to shut down. So we don't have to worry about that. All they could do is say they'll kill you. Hypothetically, right? But let's just talk about now the United States. So the United States, we still sort of have a republic, if we can keep it, so to speak. And so what we saw is that, and we're seeing ever more, is the red states and the blue states are certainly breaking apart. But we have precedents. So for example, marijuana in America has been illegal for a long time. But some of the states decided that we are going to decriminalize it. Not necessarily legalize it, but decriminalize it. Like Oregon started, and then Colorado, and then California, and then on and on and on. And now more states, and now President Biden's like, okay, we'll just make it legal federally. And so we sort of have this like decentralized movement from the ground up. Now, why do I say that? Because we're seeing the same thing with Bitcoin. So now we have Montana and Arkansas and states now enshrining the rights to own Bitcoin. Oklahoma just passed a bill last week where they've guaranteed your right. And why does that matter? In America, we're the land of the free. supposedly. And what that means is that we're free to do anything we want. You see, laws don't give us permission. Laws take away our freedom. That's the way it works in America. So we don't say, hey, tell us what we can do. No, we can do anything we want. Laws prevent us, right? So what the Constitution does is it guarantees rights, right? It prohibits the governments from infringing on those rights. So this is basically what Oklahoma's done, is they have passed a bill that prohibits the rights of the government to take away your ability to use and own Bitcoin and self-custody it. But then it gets even better. So now multiple states are moving in that direction. And last week, the House passed a bill through unanimous bipartisanship that guarantees Americans' rights to have Bitcoin, self-custody Bitcoin, and use Bitcoin. Shall not be infringed. So it hasn't passed the Senate yet. It's only passed the House, so it still has to get through one more, but it doesn't really matter. It shows the direction that we're going. And I think anybody who's afraid that the governments are going to kill you on sight if you use it, I think those fears are a little bit unfounded. Now, certainly North Korea and maybe Ireland might, but not the rest of the world. Not the rest of the world.
No, that's fair. And I wasn't really aware of that because, again, I'm not that close to the Bitcoin community in general. So I wasn't even aware of those legal things that were going through.
And this has all just happened in the last week.
Right.
This is breaking news.
That's one. Okay, that's one. I'm forgiven slightly for not being too aware of it. But yeah, so I guess if there's a groundswell up and various politicians get engaged, that can overturn or spancel the kind of the theys getting their way and bringing in all kinds of regulatory nonsense. Not so much killing you, but just, making it that you have to declare and making it that, you have to go on registers and just all this crap that you would not want. Because, as you said earlier, off camera, we saw Trudeau, what he did, and that's not even with electronic Bitcoin. That was just coming in on old-fashioned, getting the banks to shut their accounts. So I had a concern that they'll begin to bring in that kind of infrastructure too, to make Bitcoin less free, less anonymous, etc. It was just that kind of queasy feeling.
So they're not able to do that. I mean, they can only do it through regulation. They can't change it, right? So for example, they could say, to your point, right, hey, if you have Bitcoin, you have to declare it, and then you have to go sign up on this list, and then every 7 days you have to come. I mean, they could create these regulations, but there's just no way to enforce that against the network, right? And the thing is, and again, I can speak just from an American lens, so forgive me if it doesn't apply, but in America, we've had a war on drugs since the 1970s, and we spent trillions of dollars on keeping drugs out of the streets. And today, fentanyl is the number one cause of death for 18 to 35-year-olds. So with trillions of dollars, they can't even stop drugs. And think about drugs. And drugs have to be, one, cultivated, they're physical, so they have to be grown, cultivated, processed, packaged, shipped, smuggled, and then distributed, right? And Bitcoin is completely digital. So if they can't stop a physical thing from being used, how do they stop it in digital? And then even more, then we have to think about incentive systems, right? So think about the incentive system. When they say, hey, you shouldn't do heroin, does that make you want to do heroin? No. But if they say, hey, you don't have a right to store your money in a way we can't steal from you, does that make you want to store your money in a way, right? So in America, whenever they talk about cracking down on guns, guess what happens to gun sales?
Yes.
They go through the roof, right? And so the more they try to take away your right from it, Americans are a little bit of a rebellious bunch. The more they want to try to take away our rights to own it, the more people are going to own it. And if they did, and I'm saying they're going the opposite way, but if they did want to try to crack down on it, I think it would be about as effective as the crackdown on drugs.
Yeah, pretty much, which was an absolute
As we've seen in the United
debacle.
States, every war that the U.S. declares actually backfires, right? So the war on obesity, we're fatter than ever. The war on poverty, we have more poor people than ever. The war on drugs are more rampant than they were before, right? So it's like, my guess is a war on Bitcoin would mean more people use Bitcoin.
That's it. Well, the US is great at forever wars, I think is the phrase. They're just gone. And some of those wars actually benefit certain parties, etc. So it gets very murky. But okay, so Bitcoin, no, that's great. That's a great reassurance, and to everyone watching as well. I may be a little too paranoid just after the last few years. Things were so nuts that anything is possible. But what about gold? What's your thoughts on physical gold? Because sometimes Bitcoin people, there's kind of two poles. It's the physical gold people, the rock, or your Bitcoin. But some people do straddle both.
Yeah,
and they kind of divide.
I'm old enough to straddle both, right? So I originally became a gold bug, and after I got into Bitcoin, I realized I'm actually a sound money advocate. So I'm really for sound money. The thing with gold is I'm a gold bug, so I understand it, and I understand the need for it. I think there's an interim step that central banks are trying to move back to gold. We see nations like the BRICS, Saudi Arabia, oil being traded between China and Saudi Arabia, and them recycling the reserves or the surpluses, instead of into U.S. Treasuries now, they're putting them into gold now. Yeah. So there's that interim step, but that's central banks. What do I care about that? The reality is, the way that I see it is, I'm trying to think forward looking. And so we used to be in the industrial age, today we're in the information age, right? And so we need money that moves like information, not like a clunky rock. And the reason why gold failed is because gold is too slow. How do I send you gold in Ireland when I'm in California? It's like almost impossible. So the only way for me to make that work in today's day and age is to put that into a bank, and then the bank uses a ledger, and they say, take it from Mark's account and give it to Ivor's account. But then I have to trust the ledger, and we don't trust any of them. So Bitcoin gives us the ability to go peer-to-peer with no central party, no central administrator. And now I can send you Bitcoin instantly from my bed to your bed in Ireland with no cost, within a fraction of a second, and it goes peer-to-peer, and there's nothing anybody can do to stop that. So I think gold is great from a sound money perspective, but it's not practical in an information age.
Yeah, it's the practicality and the flexibility of gold is very limited.
We're not going back to a world where we clink around with gold. And think about this in practicality. Let's just say, hypothetically, we did. Let's just say it. And we're going to walk around with a purse and carry our gold coins. Let's just say that, right?
Well,
I mean, let's yeah, okay. a saddlebag, not a purse, but
Yeah, like I think what I meant, Mark, more is the store of value, but admittedly not flexible. It's more like you've locked down a store of physical real money value, but then of course over time you would have to leech from that store and transfer it into something practical. So it's kind of like not so much you've got bags of coins, but it's safely there, and you will in quanta. You will take chunks
and so
transfer.
And so that works. And I think it depends, right? So like if you have $1,000 to your name, YOLO, right? You only live once. Throw it all in. I'm all in on Bitcoin or whatever. As you have more money, you have to diversify a little bit. So there's certainly nothing wrong with putting some of your wealth into real estate, some of your wealth into stocks, some of your wealth into gold, some of your wealth into Bitcoin. There's certainly nothing wrong with diversifying that portfolio. The percentage you want to allocate, for me, I would allocate way more to Bitcoin and a little bit to gold. And I know some gold guys who allocate mostly to gold, but a little bit to Bitcoin. And so your conviction can go there. But what I would say, though,
just a quick interlude here to give a bit more context on gold versus Bitcoin. And here's the value of Bitcoin relative to gold. And as you can see, for the last 6 months or so this year, there isn't really much difference between the two's performance, pretty much. Now, earlier, of course, going back years, Bitcoin has shot through the roof. I perceive it as speculative. As Mark says, it could be a very powerful thing, but I'm not willing to go in more than a small percentage given its nature. But that's a personal choice. So the stock market got a hammering on Friday, and actually for the last few weeks, so pensions and the indices, they've got a real bruising. And they're talking about recession maybe being here, and I'd say no maybe about it. So in the coming 12 months or so, I think we're going to see some fireworks. It might shoot up some more irrationally, but things are not going in a good direction. Macroeconomically, we're in a mess. Again, making gold very important, or Bitcoin if you're into that. Here's the gold performance in contrast, and from 19 up to actually today, I got in with some pension and other funds, $1,830 back in this point. Done quite well, and in fact 2480, it's reaching new peaks right as the stock market crashed the other day. Gold went up, but this is a 10 to 15 year play for me. It's a storage of wealth, a safeguarding of wealth, and that's the key thing. So it's a 10 to 15 year view, and it shields you from the stock market lunacy and all the other madness out there. So remonetization, I think Mark mentioned, it's closer than we think. This is a 2018 article, and basically it's essentially becoming reference money again. So really interesting things happening with gold, and the big guys are getting in. And central bank buying, of course, shooting up and sustained high buying. So yes, we're not central banks, but we need to be watching what the smartest insiders in the world are actually doing, and they're piling up in gold. And as always, there's a link there, only if you wish, no financial advice, but there's a free consultation with Josh and the team in Pure Gold in Exchange Square in London. I believe they're the best in the business with vaults all over the world. And they will give a free consultation and a year's free storage of gold if you are interested in this and if you want it stored safely. People often get it delivered to themselves. That's a separate matter. That's personal choice. But anyway, we'll get back to Mark, but you know where I stand on this issue.
What I would say, though, is I believe that the world is swinging like a pendulum swings on a 250-year time frame from centralization and back to decentralization. And human nature, we take things too far, so we go the other way, and then we go too far again, and then we go the other way. So we're peaked out at centralization, dollar homogeny, the G7, if you will, you know, the IMF, the BIS, the WEF, the WHO. But the world is rejecting that. It's not working, it's broken, it's all falling apart. And the pendulum is swinging back the other way. And so I believe the future is much more decentralized. China and Russia, they ain't playing along. Neither is the BRICS. So Ireland and the EU and whatever, the US and Canada can play whatever game they want, but they're not the majority of the world. Not in commodity production, not in population, and they're not in GDP either anymore.
No.
So they can go do whatever they want, but the rest of the world ain't playing along. And so the way that I see it is the world continues to break apart, and there's going to be a lot of uncertainty around this. And the way that we deal with uncertainty is have the most options available to us, because we don't know, right? And so I need something that gives me the most optionality. I might need to go somewhere else. And so what are you going to do with your gold? Your gold's going to be stuck in Ireland. Ireland's not letting you get out of the gold. Let me tell you a story. Crypto Rand Newmer, he's a crypto podcaster. I did a show with him, and his family came from Iran, and he grew up in South Africa. And he has a South African accent because he grew up there. But they left Iran in whenever, that was the 70s or 80s, right? And his father had melted down the family's gold and put it into a container. And everyone's being evacuated out of the country. And they took all that to get on the plane. And the people that were facilitating them to get on the plane said, hang on, you can't take that. And he's like, what do you mean? Like, this is our life savings. It was like a barrel of gold or whatever. Stay with your gold or get on the plane. They had to leave the gold. They went to South Africa. They lived in tents for 3 years or longer maybe. And so you can't take your gold with you. And so in a world of uncertainty and I need optionality, I can take my Bitcoin with me with 12 words in my head. And I think that's something that you might consider.
That is extremely powerful, Mark, and I'm very cognizant of that. And I was with the guys, I gave a couple of talks in Dubai with George and Chris and all, and a lot of the theme was Plan Bs and other domiciles, and it's very relevant. A lot of people may not be in that mode though, and if it comes to them having to flee their country, like, they're not even there yet, and they may get there at some point, and then that will very much apply. I suppose there may be an interim as we watch.
History shows us a lot of people flee their countries.
Yeah.
Right now we have massive immigration problems in your country, all through Europe, and the US.
Well, we're floating in. Huh? We're floating in as opposed to escaping our country.
I know, but those people flowing in are escaping somewhere.
Well, that's a controversial one. I think the overwhelming majority are economic migrants.
Right.
Like
They're
there's
fleeing.
no
They're
persecution.
Whatever you want to call it.
Okay, fair enough. They're economic, but that's still a need to
They're fleeing.
flee.
And they're not taking their real estate with them, and they're not carrying their gold bars with them.
No, they're just carrying a passport, which they're throwing in the trash at the airport when they get on the plane.
Yeah.
So they're not carrying anything. But the good thing is in Ireland, we give them a lot as soon as they arrive.
You know what makes me the most angry, man? I mean, there's a lot to be angry about.
Yeah.
But I was just recently in Canada flying back to the US, and the way it works flying out of Vancouver is you do the US customs in the Vancouver airport.
Same in Dublin, actually, yes.
So then when you land in the US, you don't do customs, right? And I had to stand in multiple lines. I had to have my face scanned, multiple times. I had to show my passport in the same line. It's like I go 20 feet, I have to show it again. I'm like, I'm in the same line. It's ridiculous. And then I get to the TSA part, and there's like guards everywhere, and they're like rifling through people's stuff, and I'm just standing there going, if I could envision what a military state is, this is a military state. I'm literally surrounded by guards. I've literally had my face scanned and show my passport 6 times, and they're rifling through people's bags, right? But these migrants are getting on planes and being sent anywhere, and they have no ID. So me as a citizen with no criminal record, a tax-paying citizen, born in a veteran military family, I can't fly without going through through this. But yet they're just walking right through, no ID, no nothing, and just getting a free trip wherever they like. That is just salt in the wounds.
It's crazy, but I mean, it's 100-year. It's a strategy going back to Kalergi in the Pan-European Union, and it seems self-evident that the theys want to flood the zone with very different people because it will have a certain effect which is beneficial on society, undermines society, and then there's the whole voting thing as well. They would like people to come in and then vote and change. We got a problem.
Yeah, I mean the UK now is voting in Islamic
It's nuts. Well, in Ireland just recently, 7th of June now, we've got elections, European elections, and the government is outright advertising, hey, if you're in the country, even a wet day, you can vote. And it's open. They are telling people who've just walked in the door, hey, you're allowed to vote. Do you know that? Hey, here's how you vote. So it's incredibly corrupt. But you know what? That's a murky hole to go down. But yeah, you make very good points. I think Bitcoin, I have this idea, and I could be wrong, that I will, through communities like this especially, and networks, not through my own smarts or anything, I think I'll be able to see things coming to an extent and change and morph accordingly. I don't think we're going to end up with a sudden, like in Ireland or Europe, a sudden bang event where you'd want to leave the country. I could be naive. I think I'll see things developing and shifting and building, and then I will change accordingly. Let me
tell you a story.
Okay, go for it.
You know how you catch a wild pig?
I haven't personally caught one.
So they're very difficult. They're very difficult.
Oh yeah.
So the way that I grew up in Texas hunting, and one thing that you do is you put up like a deer, with deer or something, you would put out a feeder. So every day, food like corn would come out at 5 o'clock every day. Some corn comes on the ground. The animals come. So with the pig, you put a little corn on the ground, and if you keep putting it every day, the pig keeps coming. And every day you put the corn on the ground. One day the pig shows up, and there's one section of a fence there. Doesn't think anything of it. I keep putting the corn there. Next day the pig comes, there's another section of the fence, and you keep putting the corn. Another day the pig comes, and there's 3 sides to a fence. And the pig's like, okay, keeps eating. And the next day, that 4th side is there. And the question is, do you want to stay till the 3rd one is there and try to get out before the 4th? Or do you get out earlier? And this is honestly a question I've thought about since I was a kid. Growing up, I'm old enough to have grown up under the Cold War and still, the Berlin Wall, before the Berlin Wall fell and all that. And I remember my parents telling me that walls work 2 ways. They keep people out, but they also keep people in. And so this whole Trump wall and building that wall, I've never been a big fan of that because I don't want to be trapped in my country either. And so for the last since about 2008 probably is when the big red pill happened to me after the great financial crash. I've been thinking I need to get out before that 4th section of fence comes. And now I go to Mexico all the time. I'm building a house in Mexico. I do dirt bike tours down in Mexico. I'm an hour from the border. So I drive across the border all the time. Well, a couple of years ago, they changed the border. So the freeway that you drive down would just dead end into Mexico. And Mexico guys, they'd check you in, you're going. But then they put this big S into it. So they'd have these high-speed chases down the freeway sometimes when someone would hit the border trying to get to Mexico. They put this big S in, right? So then now you have to go around, and that stops the flow, and then you still get to the Mexican side, and they check you in the country. Well, now, all along the border, what they've built is on the U.S. side, they've built turnstiles, booths for the guards. Why is there booths for the U.S. guards on that side? So they can decide if they want to let you out of the country. So now all along the southern border in Mexico, they have the U.S. side stops you before you get to the Mexican side. That's the 3rd side of the fence. And I don't know when that foresight comes, and neither does anybody else, but if you wait a little bit too long. And so there may not come a day, but I would say the U.S., I think we're, obviously we'll see what happens with the Trump and Biden thing. I have hope that we're going to start trending the right way. But in Ireland, for example, with these draconian laws that they've passed, I mean, if they get those laws through, you can't stay there. Like, how could you stay there?
Yeah, they're pretty bad. The hate speech law and all that kind of stuff.
How could you stay there in a country
We have
like
green
that?
shoots as well, because the people finally rose up. They were disgraced during COVID, but they rose up, and the hate speech laws have been pushed right back, and they've kind of gone off the table. They did a referendum to remove women and the family from the Constitution. And even though all the NGOs, all the government, and all the owned media screamed to vote yes to this referendum for people's rights, it was all nonsense.
People's rights to take women off?
To take women, they were trying to make the case that this is, not good for women and it's restrictive. But what they were really doing is they're attacking the family unit. They're attacking women, family, mothers, and they wanted to put in wording that would open up a legal ability for economic migrants illegal here to bring in family members. So they wanted to remove the nuclear family. It was quite complicated, but they came out with this scam, and the people voted 2-1 against, the biggest no vote in Ireland's history. So they're green shoots. You know what we might do, because we have to keep this real tight? We might switch to your comments on that were positive, because you've raised a lot of valid things about fourth walls, and God, I know it. But you also seem to be positive that things are moving maybe in a better direction towards decentralization. So maybe we'll finish on that positive note of why you feel, and I do too.
Yeah. Well, I think, so one, I do a lot of work on cycles, and so I think history repeats. And so even though we don't move through the life or through history linear, we move exponentially because of technology, but at the same time, we're humans. And so human nature, as I said earlier, we take things too far and we course correct. So even though we're moving parabolically, we have cycles within that, right? And so I like to look through history and that. And I've mapped out, basically you have these 80-year cycles that are like regime change or populist uprising cycles.
Fourth turning
is part of that, but and then you have 3 of those. They're 84-year cycles really, and 3 of those is 250 years. So 250 years is the big cycle, and that's really where the pendulum really swings from centralization to decentralization. So 250 years ago was the American Revolution, the French Revolution. The United States America, we rejected the centralization of the monarchy, of the king,
the crown,
and we set up a decentralized form of government, a republic, right? 250 years before that was the Protestant Reformation. We rejected the church and state. We had the printing press, we had the 95 Theses, the Bible came out, we rejected that there was only one way to God, and the church and state disappeared, right? So it's sort of like this pendulum that swings, if you will, right? And it coincides with technology. So technology moves on a 50-year cycle. So right now, those are converging at the same time, and technology is what changes the world. So the church really collapsed because of the technology of the printing press that had come out 70 years earlier. So it was the printing press that disseminated the information of the Bible that allowed the people to go, wait a minute, the church has been lying to us this whole time, right? Today we have the internet. And the internet is sort of like the printing press, where we can see the emperor wears no clothes, which is why the censorship laws are so strict.
Yeah.
And so doesn't matter how much they try to gaslight us, we understand what's going on. And just like the church and state, they labeled people heretics and they killed them, right? But it didn't matter how many people they killed, you can't stop the truth. And I believe the same is true today. So the pendulum is swinging back to decentralization. And as bad as it looks with the WEF and the WHO treaty, the pandemic treaty, and like I said, the IMF and the BS and all of that, the rest of the world ain't having that, man. The WHO treaty failed. It failed, it was rejected. It didn't go through.
It didn't, but they had 2 horses, the World Health Regulations. They were quite clever.
They're not going to give up.
They're not going
to give up. But
I'm agreeing with you, though, in what you're saying.
China and Russia and Afghanistan and Dubai, and they ain't going for that. They ain't going for it.
They know.
And Venezuela and El Salvador, no, they ain't doing that. They're not doing it. It's not happening. So sure, the G7, they can hamstring themselves, and sure, the EU can write all these AI restrictions and put themselves in the dark ages. Congratulations, good job, but it's not the rest of the world. So the world is breaking apart. China and Russia, we're going into a multipolar world. I don't think there's anyone that would debate that fact. And I think it only continues to go that way. Technology plays a big role in this because what happens is, you see, technology, the industrial age that we went into about 250 years ago, the Industrial Revolution, 1789, moved everybody into cities and factories. And it created giant corporations. And then we had mass manufacturing, and then we had mass management, and we created government structures to manage the masses. But today we don't do that anymore. Today, I have a laptop, and I travel, and I live in Mexico, and I live in Medellin, and I live in Colombia, wherever I want to go. We don't have big business. We have small business. We're decentralized. And AI, on one side, because the LLMs get programmed, are a little bit centralizing, but on the same side, I can now do the work of 10 people. And so now it's small business. We move anywhere in the world, and I don't like it in Ireland. I'm going to go live in Colombia, or I'm going to go live in Mexico, I'm going to go live in El Salvador or Dubai. And so the world is decentralizing. I just don't see how anybody can debate that. And the current form of government that we have today is no longer compatible with the world that we're in. It was developed for an industrial world of 100 years ago, and it's on its dying grasp. It realizes that it can't control the narrative, just like the church and state 500 years ago. The citizens of the world are spreading out all over where they're treated best. And the more that the governments, the G7 or NATO, the West, try to squeeze, the more people slip through their fingers. And we've gone from a world where we won through competition and being better to now a world of coercion. And incentive systems don't work that way. And so I think this is a trend. History tells us this trend. Technology shows us what's happening. I see it happening. Unfortunately, it's very volatile at the top. And unfortunately, the more that they lose grip, the more they're going to squeeze.
Cornered rats.
And the more they squeeze, the more they're going to lose. And the more they lose, the more they're going to squeeze. So it's probably going to continue to be pocketed of getting worse and better at the same time in different locations. And the nations with the most to lose will be the worst places to live. And the places that are the up and coming, the Dubais and the El Salvadors, are going to be the best places to live.
Yeah, that's a great summary, Mark. And I kind of
That's a 5-minute summary.
Yeah,
Or
in fairness,
a two-minute summary.
No, it's excellent, and that's it. I mean, cornered rats, end of eras, end of empires, kind of fourth turning. I mean, people need to realize there's going to be fireworks the next few years, but we're going to come through it. We're going to come out of it, and but unfortunately, in Europe and the West, you know, some people may consider moving somewhere else, especially if they have the ability to be mobile, if they're working in something that allows them to be mobile. And unfortunately, sadly, a lot of people maybe don't have the skills and flexibility. So there'll be a certain amount of suffering.
But they can learn those skills.
They can learn those skills, and they can do something else. They can also push back in general, and that's what we need.
What we need is the comfortable wolves to wake up and
Yeah.
become uncomfortable.
Grow a pair. Just like you and me, I hope. Thank you, Mark.
Well, there you have it, folks. People are always getting on to me to go through Bitcoin or interview people on Bitcoin. So there you go. And I'll do more in the future, go into more depth. As I mentioned there in the middle of the video, you know, there is an offer there with free consultation, free storage for a year, etc. with the guys at Pure Gold. I think they're the best in the business. And you can avail of that if you wish. So completely up to you. No financial advice, yada, yada, yada. But you know where I'm placing my bets.